Hi, and welcome to another edition of Tech Tips. Today we're going to talk about Zoom. So it's more Zoom training as we're doing this distance learning in the month of April 1st as I'm recording this. Zoom has become one of the tools that we're using. And the reason we're using Zoom is Zoom has a lot of controls that some of the other software, including Google Meet, does not have. But it's important that we learn how to use those controls to make sure that we prevent things like what they call Zoom bombing. So we're going to take a few moments and talk about some of that during this video. So one of the things we're going to do is let's go ahead and jump into Zoom here. So I'm going to run the Zoom application on my PC. It may look a little different if you're on the Mac. But one of the things is for our students, the students do not need Zoom accounts. As a matter of fact, it's discouraged for students to have Zoom accounts. You as the staff, you as the teacher need a Zoom account so that you can host the meetings. The students do not need a Zoom account in order to participate. And again, I'll say we want to discourage the students from setting them up because they could do other things once they have that may be violations of FERPA, COIPA, and SIPA, and we want to avoid that. So again, you as the host are the only one that needs the Zoom account in the Zoom software. And for the staff that does not have them, we're actively working on making sure that everyone is in Clever so that you'll have a Zoom account so that you can host a meeting. But if you're being invited to staff meetings, just like the students, you do not need a Zoom account to participate in a staff meeting. Let's take a look here. So once we jump into Zoom, we can start our meeting. We can join a meeting, but let's take a moment and let's go over here to the settings icon. If we click on settings, there are some other options that we have available to us. Now, I'm going to include some links in the email that I'm going to send along with this video, and there will also be some links in the YouTube description below. You may have to click the more button, you may have to scroll down, but it's 3 different articles that talks about some of the best practices for staff and for schools when using Zoom. And these are going to be important to pay attention to and important to follow to make sure that your Zoom session is protected from outsiders, okay? So one of the first things we'll talk about is that when you go into your settings here, there's more settings that are available than just this screen. And since we have licensed versions with our agreement with Clever and Zoom, we have access to those additionals. So we want to click here and go to View More Settings. That's going to bring up a window, and then we could go ahead and close this window to get it out of the way. That allows us to do some more settings within Zoom. In particular, we want to go to settings here and look at meeting settings. So we have some options here, some of which are not as important, but some of them which are very important. One of them is whether or not we allow participants to join the meeting before the host arrives. We want this turned off, and the gray here indicates that it is turned off. We do not want the students to be able to join before the teacher joins, okay? We also don't want to use our personal ID when scheduling a meeting. If you read one of the articles, you'll see some of the reasons why you want to avoid using that personal ID, even though it's available. And one of the other things that we want to make sure that we change is, I'm going to scroll down here. All right, we want to turn off private chats. Now, turning off private chat will stop the students from being able to send chat and text messages to each other in the background. And again, if you're missing some of this, it's going to be in one of those 3 links that I have. Again, take the time to read through those, but we definitely want to turn that off. And then we want to auto-save chats. So if there is something inappropriate that is said, you'll have a log of that. Okay? And Scrolling down further, we want to set some parameters for screen sharing. Screen sharing is where anybody that's in the meeting can share their screen. And by default, again, since most of these, if you're hosting, is going to be student facing, and again, we're talking specifically to teachers and paras that are going to be interfacing with students. If you're having staff meetings, some of these are not as important, but for teachers especially, screen sharing is going to be important. You'll want to make sure that you come in here and you set this to host only. And who can start sharing when someone else is sharing? Host only, which should be blanked out if you have this one, because you're the only one that could share anyway. Once you get to the high school, you may have some cases where you want students to share. If that's the case, you could say all participants, but you as the host, if you leave this host only, you can kind of take back over your presentation. But for most of us, we're going to say host only. All right. And also we want to turn off annotation. Again, this is for hosting with students. The host can always annotate. So you'll have those tools that I talked about earlier to highlight things on your screen, but you can turn it off for your students so that your students don't have the opportunity to go in there and mark up whatever you're working on. Same thing with the whiteboard. We want to turn the whiteboard off for participants. Again, you as the host will still have the whiteboard available to you. And also, you can turn off remote control, which will stop the students from giving someone else remote control. So those are going to be some of the important ones. And again, rewind the video, watch it again if you missed any of that. And let's keep going. So one of the other things that's really important that's on by default now is waiting room. So waiting room is listed here, okay? And what waiting room does, it goes back to what we said before. They can't join the Zoom session until you get there. But even once you're there, you have to approve them to come into the room. This is going to be your control to make sure that only the students that you invited to your class are there. So if for some reason the student shared the session ID, you can still control who's in the meeting room to make sure that only your students are there. And by doing that, you're going to protect your students' learning ability, as well as protecting the district from FERPA, COIPA, and SIPA violations. Okay, so we want to make sure waiting room is on and all participants will go into the waiting room. All right. All right, so we're going to start a new meeting here. And I'm going to ask the Tech Pro to join me for a meeting. So I'm going to set an invite. And then on the other computer, so on my other computer, which happens to be a Chromebook, I'm going to click the link in the email to join the meeting. And I'm going to join with video. And now here's where our waiting room kicks in. So Tech Pro is now waiting, and on the screen for Tech Pro, I see, please wait, the meeting host will let you in soon. So now I have the ability to admit, or I can see the waiting room. Let's see the waiting room. Now, again, the video may slow down a little bit here, but right now we have one person waiting. So we can go and we can admit that person that's waiting. And now Tech Pro, which is echoey, so let me mute this. Tech Pro is now in the meeting with the director. I'm going to end this meeting to save this video from slowing way down while we try to do so many things. But that's what the waiting room allows you to do. The waiting room allows you to admit the students in, and their name will be based upon what their Google login is when you sent the invitation to them. So that's what the waiting room allows us to do, allows us to protect our Zoom meetings. I encourage you to read the 3 documents that are attached. They're quick reads. They should be very informative as far as helping you make sure that the Zoom meetings are set up properly for the K-12 environment, and we're protecting not only the students, but we're protecting the learning environment to make sure that there are not additional distractions in an already difficult situation that we're in trying to educate remotely. So a quick overview of the 3 articles that are posted. First one is tips to deter Zoom bombers. I said we would talk about a Zoom bomber. A Zoom bomber is somebody that gets the meeting ID, jumps into your meeting, and then interferes in some way. It happens on 2 levels. It could be somebody in the general public that wants to either spy on your lesson or your classroom, or it could be an internal, a student from another class that wants to be disruptive. So the first article talks about how to deter Zoom bombers. The next article talks specifically about classrooms and holding classrooms on Zoom. One of the things that the article talks about towards the end is about the requirement that you don't post screenshots of your class online. Again, this is a different environment, and teachers may be excited to show and talk about what they're doing, but you could violate FERPA, or you could violate some of the student privacy issues by posting the classroom. So just be cautious. Check with our communications director if you want to promote the learning that you're doing, and make sure it gets cleared and that we don't have any students that are covered by non-disclosures, or they don't want their picture published. Also, one of the other things that this particular article talks about is Zoom being not compliant. If you read it carefully, though, you'll see that they added a policy specifically for K-12. Our account is covered. I'll say it again. Our account is covered by their FERPA policy. So I know there's been some concern about Zoom not being FERPA, COPA, or SIPA compliant. It is under the agreement that we have. It's not under the free agreement, but it is under our agreement. So I know there are some news articles out there that talk about that also. We've spent as much time as we could in a short amount of time that we had to make sure that the tools that we're using are compliant, because we're not willing to jeopardize the district's compliance. So we are fine using the Zoom account that we have in the manner that's been described in this video, using those protections. The last one again talks about how to keep crashers out of your Zoom event. That means not sharing the event ID, making sure that you're using the waiting room, and admit students into the session. The last little tip that may or may not be covered in one of the articles is it's recommended that you start your Zoom session with all the microphones muted. That way you as the teacher are in control of the session. It also makes sure that distractions from other students, dogs barking, parents entering the room, siblings entering the room, are not heard by the other students and cause them to be distracted. It's a complicated new world that we're in, trying to have a compliant learning session while we're in students' homes, and we're at some level allowing students into our homes. But if we work together, we can get through this. Any questions, comments, or concerns that you have about using Zoom, feel free to email me, the technology director, or you can choose to use the Ask the Tech Pro. It will make sure that those questions are answered and resolved for you. The technology department is working hard to make sure that we're here for you during these challenging times, to make sure we give you the support that you need. So you are not bothering us, you are not disturbing us. It's the job that we signed up for, and we've signed up for such a time as this. So please reach out to us. Keep up the good work. You guys are doing excellent work. Hopefully these videos are helping. If you need help with other areas or concern, Ask the Tech Pro at vikingmail.org is available to you. Ask those questions. We'll create more videos like this where we can answer it for everybody. It's hard for me to do phone calls, but if you send those emails, I can respond to everybody and make sure that everybody gets that information. And until next time, ask the Tech Pro, and as always, go Vikes.